During this presentation, if you have questions, blur it out, raise your hand, whatever you prefer. Ask any of the questions you have. I have the advantage of I get to run these trucks every day, so what might seem very obvious to me may not be as obvious to you. If you feel the need to ask me which way to turn the steering wheel in order to turn the truck left, I'm not going to razz you for it, the other guys might, but I won't. I get that you're not going to know everything about this truck, so please just ask any of the questions you have. As far as brakes go, we're all adults here. You guys need a break, tell me. Smoke break, bathroom break, lunch break. Yesterday we just kind of played it by ear. We can do the same thing today. You guys just kind of tell me. My name's Alex. I've been with Pierce, going on 7 years here. Started out on the floor wiring and building the ladders. After a year that I moved into our ARF department, the airport style trucks. Did final product setup and diagnostics on those. After a year that I moved back into the aerial doing final product setup and diagnostics on those. Last year was my first full year on the road doing the on-site customer training. Again, if you have questions, ask me. If I don't know the answer, I got a phone book full of people that are way smarter than I am, and I've yet to be able to stump them with a question. We have the in-class portion here, then we go do a walk around the truck, do part ID, kind of point stuff out, and then we take it outside, start doing stabilizer sets and running the aerial. I showed you how to get the manual. Make sure you get in there and have a good idea of what's all available to you in there. I don't expect you to read that manual word for word. It's written by lawyers and engineers, and they don't exactly write a thrilling book. But get in there, understand what's available to you and where things are in there. We only want trained personnel operating the device. Make sure you get your stick time in on this. This is going to be a little bit different getting used to this, so make sure you get your time in playing with it and understanding how it reacts to your controls. The manual as well as this class is going to go through safety first, then general part ID, operation, and then maintenance. We only want trained personnel. Make sure you, again, get your stick time in, get used to how this operates. This class does not necessarily qualify you to run the aerial. Your department has SOPs on who can touch what, and we need to follow those first and foremost. Anytime we're running any sort of aerial, we need to be sure of what we're doing. If you're unsure, you're not sure if you can do something, it's better to stop, ask questions, consult the manual as opposed to continue running the aerial on scene. That applies for any of the aerial products. Anytime we're running an aerial, there are inherent risks to ourselves, others, and the equipment, so we need to be aware of those. Getting into safety. According to the NFPA, safety tags are considered safety equipment. They are required on the truck. If they become damaged, missing, or illegible, they need to be replaced. On this one right here, there's a part number here, sometimes in the center, sometimes on the left side. If that tag becomes damaged, missing, or illegible, you need to replace it. Tell the dealer the part number. If you can still read that, they'll be able to get you a new tag. If you can't read the part number, the tag's completely missing, give them an approximate location where on the truck that tag was located, and they have a master cheat sheet that says what needs to be where, and they'll be able to get you a new tag. Keep in mind, these tags are there for a reason. So even if you don't know why it's saying not to do something, please do follow it. Most of these tags are there because someone did it at some point and it didn't work out well for them. One of the tags I give an example of is between the driver and the officer's position. Above the headliner, riveted to the roof skin of the cab, there is a box. That is your rollover sensor. If that sees the truck tilt to 45 degrees, it sets off all the airbags at once. Because once that truck tilts to 45 degrees, there's no saving it, it will roll over. Now, if you drill out the rivets and let that box swing down, the truck thinks it's past 45 degrees. It's going to set off all your airbags. Now, typically, it's not firefighters that do it. Typically, it's the radio installers do it. But it's an example of just because you don't know why it says not to drill out those rivets and let that box swing down, it's a good idea to follow what the tag has to say. 3 different levels of tags: danger, injury, death will occur; warning, injury or death may occur; caution, potential for equipment damage or minor injuries. Big one we talk about is electrocution hazard. You guys on the East Coast have this worse than just about every other part of the country. So 50 feet from power lines if you don't know the voltage, 20 feet from 350 kilovolts or less. Keep in mind, as that humidity increases, that arc distance increases. Also, when we get into the higher winds, you get that sway in the lines. That may close up the clearance distance you thought you had. The ground pads and tires do not make this an insulated device. In no way, shape, or form is this an insulated device. I tell a story about a department down in Florida. They set up to do their undercab checks in approximately the same location every day. One day they happened to pull a little bit farther forward. They put their ladder up to flip up the cab. Line arced out on the ladder, blew out the tire, set the truck on fire, total loss for the department. So don't get complacent with, oh, we set the truck up here all the time. You might just get a little bit closer to a line one day and end up totaling out the truck. Also keep in mind, with modern trucks nowadays, we have computers on everything. Your airbags, engine, transmission, pump, ladder, everything has a computer associated with it nowadays. If you get a minor arc out in there and you get arcing inside that computer, you can end up burning out that computer. We all know how the supply chain is nowadays. If you burn out a computer or two, A, they're not cheap, B, you're not getting them tomorrow. So that truck's gonna be down for a while. So try to back off the power lines as much as possible. If you are on the apparatus becomes electrified, we ask that you stay on it if you can. Contact the power company, get that line shut down, then we'll go to deal with it. Now that's not always realistic. Depending, truck starts on fire, scene's changing, you need to get off of that truck. At that point, we ask that you jump as far off as you can. Try to land with both feet together. Once both feet are down on the ground, small shuffles keeping both feet in contact with the ground to get away from it. What we're concerned about here is when a device becomes electrified, it puts concentric rings of varying voltage down into the ground. If you bridge those rings, you can become part of a circuit at that point. If you fall when you hit the ground, try to get parallel with the truck and roll away. Don't try to get up again, worry about bridging those rings. With you guys having a pump station, or pump operator's position, if the aerial's in the air, there is a step that pulls out underneath the pump operator's position. Pump operator must be up on top of that whenever the aerial's in the air to isolate the pump operator. We don't want them to become the path to ground. Operator is required at the turntable controls during all aerial operations, and I'm going to go over load chart, stabilizer set, and overrides later. But if you follow the load chart to a T, you set up on a solid surface that can handle the weight of the truck, and you don't touch overrides when you shouldn't be, this truck won't tip over. But if you break any of those three, I cannot help you at that point. Again, operator must be at turntable controls during all aerial operations. Their job to monitor the loading and unloading of the ladder, whether we're flowing water, changing wind conditions, changing conditions on that scene related to the aerial. It's the operator at the turntable's control to monitor that. Do not extend or retract the sections with personnel standing on the sections. 3000 PSI does not care about your foot and will go right through it. The aerial is designed for positive loads only, so we take the ladder at 0 degrees and fully extend it. You'll notice each section kind of hangs off of one another. We design the aerial to load up that way. What we don't want you to do is take that ladder and set it down on top of a roof line, parapet wall, or the ground. Very quickly you can excessively negatively load that ladder. If you do that, typically the first thing that fails is the handrails. If you buckle a handrail, that is not a small weld repair you can get done down the road. That is an entire section replacement. That is not cheap, and that is not a quick thing to happen. There's a lot of labor involved with replacing those. Now, if you have it stuck out over a roof line, you send some individuals to the end of the ladder, and their weight causes deflection of the ladder and causes it to touch the roof line. While we want to avoid that, that's not the end of the world. What we're concerned about is using the hydraulics to push down on top of things. A lot of people don't realize how much power they have behind them with the hydraulics. And very quickly you can excessively negatively load it and end up buckling those handrails. One other condition you'll notice some negative loading with this ladder is if we stick it up at 77 degrees and you flow 1500 gallons a minute 90 degrees off the ladder, you're going to notice some negative deflection from that reactionary force of the water there. That's not the end of the world. We designed it to handle that. That's perfectly fine. It's just pushing down on solid objects that can end up damaging it. Operators responsible for knowing the condition of their device. So when you first get in, look over your ladder. Make sure there's no denting in the section, chipping in the paint, broken wires on the wire rope cable, exposed copper, just overall understanding the condition of your device. When you first get in on scene, as you're walking to the back of the truck, take a peek up at the aerial. Make sure nothing got damaged on the way to the scene. And also, when I first get up on the turntable, I take a peek down my sections before I fly that aerial. I talked about 3000 PSI doesn't care about your foot. I had a department that for some reason had a pipe pole stuck down between their sections and tried to extend their sections. That pipe pole disintegrated, also damaged the sections when it did so. So please make sure your sections are clear before you move your ladder. Your man-saver bars, so the foam bars on your access point to your turntable, make sure they spring back to their closed position after they're pushed out of the way. Again, if the aerial contacts a high voltage source, do not touch it. Make sure you get in contact with the power company, get that line shut down before we deal with it. Personnel on the ladder should wear safety belts at all times. I'm sure you guys have your own SOPs for that. When using the aerial for firefighting operations, try to approach when using it for firefighting operations, try not to stick it directly over the heat source. Try to back it off a bit. Yeah, the steel can handle it for a while, but you got plastics, composites, and electronics that are not going to like it for as long. When using the aerial for rescue operations, try to approach a victim from above or the sides at a minimum. Coming from below, victims have a tendency to jump. As they fall, their weight increases exponentially. That can shock load or overload the ladder, as well as being an inherent risk to the victim themselves. Using the aerial in extreme cold conditions, be aware of the possibility of ice buildup. Ladder is rated to operate with up to 1/4 inch of ice covering the entire aerial, but we fall under a different load chart at that point. Also, we can damage the aerial when extending or retracting with a bunch of ice buildup on there. As far as you guys installing equipment in the cab, in the compartments, that's your domain. My warning with that, be aware of what's behind what you're drilling into. Do not use a 10-inch drill bit to drill through an 1/8 piece of aluminum. Cannot tell me how many times I've fielded customer calls where it's, hey, my cab lights don't work anymore. And then you go over to the truck and there's a flashlight mount directly over the top of a main trunk harness. If you drill through a harness and the wires aren't connected anymore, the circuit's not going to work anymore. So please be aware of what's behind what you're drilling into. Anything to do with the suspension, frame, torque box, turntable, or ladder sections, no drilling, welding, cutting, no modifications. Also be aware that if you guys go to add a new mount to the ladder that we don't know about, that new mount as well as the tooling in that mount are going to pull out of your load chart whether or not you realize it. So in this ladder here, they have a roof ladder on the base section there. That roof ladder and those mounts do not pull out of their load chart. Those are already figured into your load chart. If you want to add any new tooling mounts, talk to your dealer. They'll get in contact with our engineering staff and they need to approve any new mounts added to the ladder. We don't want to elevate, rotate, or lower the device with unsecured personnel. Make sure everyone's secure before we start moving it, and still no extending or retracting the personnel in the sections. This device is equipped with interlocks. It needs to see all 4 stabilizers on the ground in order for you to pick the aerial up out of the cradle, and needs to see the aerial put back in the cradle before it allows you to pick up the stabilizer. This happens automatically. There's no switching you have to do on your part. Once it sees all 4 stabilizers, it allows you to pick up the ladder. Once it sees the ladder back in the cradle, it allows you to pick up the stabilizer. It happens automatically in the background for you. Collision avoidance. So your ladder understands the physical shape of your truck. You are not able to run your ladder into your truck. Self-aware as in it is aware of itself. Does not know where anything else is in the world though. Doesn't know where that building is, the ground, the apparatus next to you. Will let you run into any of those. Also, if we were to leave, say, a vent saw sitting up on top of the body here and try to lower the ladder down on top of that, it's going to stop you before you hit the body, but it's not going to stop you before you push that saw into the body. So any new things added to the truck that weren't on there at the factory, does not know those are there. So if you were to add, say, like a hard suction line on top of here, a new mount that we didn't know about, you need to contact the dealer because collision avoidance would have to get reprogrammed. But as the truck left the factory, it won't let you hit the truck. Short jack, so if you short jack this one side of the truck, you cannot operate on that side. The opposite side of the truck, full weight, full water, no additional restrictions on that side. Maximum function slowdown. So as I hit full elevation, full lower, full extend, full retract, come into a collision avoidance zone or a short jack zone, the ladder is going to ramp to a stop as opposed to just stopping the moment it hits that limit. So real dramatic ones with that. If you raise the ladder and hold it full stick all the way into the end of raise, instead of smacking the end of the cylinders, it's going to ramp to a stop to prevent as much whipping in the ladder. And more aerial function interlocks. The parking brake must be set. The transmission must be neutral in order for aerial master and aerial PTO to operate. Unless you have the water pump running, then it's the rear drive line disconnect instead of neutral.
Well, I'm sorry. Can you just say that again real quick? Because we have like
So if you're
lines and ladders.
If you're in pump, you could still use the ladder.
You still use the ladder. Okay.
Yeah.
If you leave it in drive and you're not in pump, it's not going to let you
You're not going to use it.
Yeah.
All right. Because we're gonna be using both at the same time. Or something.
Yeah, it's just when you throw that air lever and that disconnects the rear drive line, that is the same as it being in neutral.
Yeah, once you engage the PTO.
Thanks.
So turning the truck on, I know it seems very obvious, but we've had enough issues with it, so I have to go over it anyways. Starting the truck, hit your battery switch, turn your ignition on, let your gauges sweep in, let your gauges sweep back, let the lights on the dash clear, then hit your starter. When you hit the starter switch, the immense amp draw from that starter can interrupt the prove-out processes that happen during that gauge sweep. The one you can hear is ABS, but there's a bunch of other systems that are doing their prove-out. If you start during that prove-out process, it can lead to a bunch of weird issues. Water pump won't go in gear, ABS lights, check engine lights, half your cab lights don't work. 99% of the time, the fix to that is turning the truck off and turning it back on properly. I'd rather wait 3 to 5 seconds sitting in the bay here as opposed to having to restart a truck once I get on scene. Once we get back from the scene, get the engine back down to an idle, turn off the ignition, let the engine come to a stop, then hit your battery switch. While the engine's still turning, the alternator's still producing current. If you hit the battery switch with the engine still turning, you can deadhead current to the ECM. You could burn out an ECM doing that. Not going to say it's going to happen every time. It's only happened 3 times that I know of since I've been working with the company. But burn out an ECM, those are not in ready supply. They're expensive. So best thing to do is always wait for it. What I'll do, turn off the ignition, I'll get out of the truck. By the time my feet hit the ground, I can turn around, hit the battery switch. For the same reason, do not use the battery switch to turn the truck all off in one swipe. Another thing I see people do that we shouldn't be doing is they'll turn the truck off properly, and then with the battery switch off, they'll come back and rock the ignition to the on position to save that second when responding. We need a brief moment in time between battery switch and ignition. When I say brief moment in time, I'm talking a 32nd of a second, a 64th of a second. By the time your hand goes from one to the other, that's more than enough time, but there's a couple of systems that need to wake up between these two. They're fast, but they're not instant. So one of the things you'll notice throughout this PowerPoint is these pictures may not always match up to your ladder specifically. Just because I use a generic PowerPoint and every truck's optioned differently. One of those is you guys have the metal handle, not the plastic handle. Also, your switches for these look different, but they operate the same. You have a stabilizer camera here, so that's going to take your cab display here and then show you a overhead view of where your side stabilizers are going to land in reference to the ground. So there's a red outline there. It's really useful if you got to position efficient stabilizers between cars, avoiding a curb, stuff like that. Aerial master, that's going to power up the electronics for your ladder. Aerial PTO is going to spin up the hydraulics for your ladder. And then you have a front wheel lock here. More or less, front wheel lock, air brakes on a truck like this. Rear axles, they have dual chamber. You have your spring brake and your service brake. Spring brake is what activates when you set the park brake. Service brake is what activates when you push down with your foot on the brake pedal. Front axle on these trucks, they only have one chamber, which is a service brake style. They do not have the spring brake on them. So by activating your front wheel lock, that does the same thing as you pushing your foot down on the brake. There's just a solenoid doing it for you. This is a hard toggle switch, so it's like a light switch. When you turn it on, it stays in that position. You guys as operators do not need to turn this off. When you push in the park brake, this switch, while it will stay in that on position, the light here will turn off. It'll automatically turn that solenoid off for you so you can go drive. When you get on scene, you set that park brake, front wheel lock comes right back on. Also, right now with it sitting in the bay, with the ignition off, the front wheel lock will turn off when the ignition turns off. Just so if there were to be an air leak or something like that, it's not trying to hold the front brakes and draining your tanks. In all reality, there are 2 reasons why this switch still exists on trucks. Either it's a legacy thing, we've always had it so we still have it, or it's a maintenance item. Some mechanics prefer having the ability to turn it on and off on their own, so that's the reason for the switch being there. But for you guys as operators, you don't need to turn that off. Also, the aerial master and aerial PTO, before you drive away, you do not need to turn those off. When you push in the park brake, it'll automatically turn those off. But I can understand if you've been doing this for 20 years and that habit's kind of been drilled into your head, you turn those off before you drive away. You're not going to hurt anything by turning them off before you push in the park brake. You're just doing something you don't necessarily need to.
So we can leave all those switches on.
So this one you can leave on, and when you set the park brake again, it'll come back on. These, because those are momentary, when you click it, it rocks and then rocks back. When you set that park brake again, they're not going to automatically come back on.
Okay.
So you have to turn them back on. But this one you can just leave on forever. Into your stabilizer control compartment, you have emergency stop active, override switch, and then down on the controller here, you have your EPU switch here. I'm going to cover those when we get into overrides and manual controls. You have your stabilizer power switch as well as enabled light here. Not shown on this picture, but is equipped with the newer trucks. This is an older picture. There's going to be another little panel right up here with a amber light on it that says front axle limited. That's going to be something I cover here in a little bit. But that'll illuminate whatever the front axle is lifted off the ground. You have a diagnostic port here. It's a Type E printer port. It's for me to plug my computer in to do diagnostics or change programming. Really not much for you to do in there. You have your stabilizer pendant, so whenever you activate this switch, you get an illumination light up here as well as a activation light here. This is a stabilizer not stowed light, so it will show up red whenever at least one stabilizer is not in the stowed position. You have a level assist switch here. Driver side beam, extender retract, jack raise and lower. Officer side beam, extender retract, jack raise and lower. Your officer rear raise and lower, and your driver side raise and lower for the rear stabilizers. You have fully extended lights for your beams here, planted lights for your jacks. Up onto your turntable, you have an FRC intercom. When the ladder leaves the cradle, the intercom at the tip becomes an open mic. There's no push to talk up there. Once it leaves the cradle, it automatically starts communicating everything set at the tip down the ladder. In order to talk the other way, you have to push and hold the push to talk to communicate up. If you have the volume turned up real loud here, and the ladder's out of the cradle, anything set at the tip of the ladder can be heard for a distance around the truck. So if you're at the tip of the ladder, know your audience. You have another emergency stop here. You have a tippet tracking light switch. That's a momentary click on, click off. You have a ladder illumination switch. This is another thing that looks different. This is our old design where we had a split panel. We went to a solid panel now. You have an aerial speed switch, so that's actually located up here. There's normal and fast. Normal, if you activate 1, 2, or 3 controls, the truck will not automatically high idle. And you'll also have 0 to about 75% of the maximum speed of the ladder available. If you shift it into fast, you'll have 0 to 100% of the speed available. And then if you open 1 control, it's a 1350 idle, 2 controls, a 1550 idle, 3 controls, a 1550 idle. You cannot move the ladder any slower in normal than you can in fast. The minimum speeds are exactly the same. It just changes the top speed. So it slows the ladder down and limits the high idling. You have a EPU switch here, another thing we'll cover in the overrides. You have a stow and deploy as well as a stowed light and your monitor controls here. The stow switch is just for the monitor. You have your ladder controls here and your CZ3 display. So these controls are going to be something to get used to, the fly-by-wire style with the new Ascendant programming behind them. In order to move this control out of the neutral position, you need to lift up on this collar, then you can move it out of the neutral position. Once you are out of the neutral position, you don't necessarily need to keep holding that collar, but most people find it comfortable to keep their hand underneath there. These are equipped with ramp starts and ramp stops. That means if I take the control and go 0 to 100%, the ladder is going to ramp up to that speed instead of instantly going to that speed. And if I just let go, the ladder is going to ramp down from that. That does mean if I let go of a control, the ladder does not stop the instant I let go of the control. There is going to be some over travel at that point. Now that concerns a lot of people. Understandably, I let go of the control, the ladder kept moving. How often do you let go of a manual control ladder at full speed and just let go of the control? Especially rotation, probably never. Person at the tip's going for a ride. So if you treat this like a manual valve or a ladder without ramps, where you're ramping yourself, kind of spitballing numbers here, but say rotation I'm holding wide open and I let go and that over travel is 2 degrees, 3 degrees. Instead, if I ramp down to 10% of the control and then let go, that over travel might only be a half a degree, maybe a degree. The ramps are proportional to the last speed you're commanding for the ladder. It only starts to really engage the ramps when you stop commanding any speed at all. That's when it goes into its ramp profile. You can feather these. I dare say I can feather these just about better than anyone can with a bold manual valve. There are 2 ways to get this ladder to stop immediately if you need to. The emergency stop, so that'll stop any hydraulic function immediately. Now keep in mind, both of these things I'm talking about here, this is the same as just letting go of a manual valve. The ladder's just gonna dead stick. Maybe there's a situation where that's needed, but keep in mind, someone's at the tip, they're going for a ride, they're getting that ladder whip at that point. Also, if I take a control, say I'm rotating right, and I cross over the neutral plane and touch left, the moment I touch left, that ladder stops immediately. Now I want to return the control to neutral at that point, because if I keep holding left, it's going to dead stick, and then it's going to start ramping into left, so we're going to get even more ramp there. Now if we're talking a building collapse and that building's coming at the ladder, you're going to have to do that at that point. But keep in mind, there's going to be a lot of movement at that tip at that point. The truck side computers and the ladder side computers are actually 2 separate systems, but they do communicate. What that enables is we get warnings. If you get a low fuel, high engine temp, low oil pressure, any warnings like that down in the cab, those will be communicated to you up on the turntable. As well as you can see truck side screens up on the ladder and ladder side screens down on the truck side. You guys have the monitor controls up at the tip. You're able to run the water nozzle from the tip position. Something to note with this, if you have the monitor in the stowed position, if you try to quick bump this out of the stowed position, it will not move out of that. You're gonna have to hold that control for about 2 seconds before it'll actually start moving that monitor. This is so if someone accidentally bumps it, they don't bump it out of the stowed position. That's kind of important with this ladder specifically, because with the tandem axle, the monitor must be in the stowed position in order for you to put it in the cradle. This is to prevent someone from accidentally bumping it out of that stowed position, so it's just to show intent. Same thing with the stow and deploy down here. If you go to stow or deploy the monitor, you're going to have to press and hold for about 2 to 3 seconds before it actually starts to do the stow or deploy function. This again is to show intent, just so if we're flowing water 1,500 gallons a minute over here and you accidentally bump the stow, it's not swiping the whole scene with that. And anything done at the controls here for the monitor up at the tip can be overridden by the console. Console's always king with anything from us. So if we're rotating the monitor right up here, person down below selects left, the monitor is going to stop and start going left. Any questions so far?
Is there an indicator light that shows if that's not in the right position? So
If it's in the stowed position?
if it's like you said, it won't allow you to stow the ladder
If it's not in the stowed position.
is
So
there an
yours,
indicator?
yeah, yours looks a little different. So older style light and different color. Yours is green, but when it gets to the stowed position, that green light turns on. So driving these trucks, this being an emergency vehicle, it will tell you reasons why you shouldn't drive the truck, but it's not going to stop you. So if we were to go out in the bay right now, fully extend the stabilizer, get in the cab, push in the park brake, put in drive, it's going to scream at me that I have a stabilizer not stowed, but it's not going to do anything to stop me. It will let me try to pull out of the bay. I've seen enough pictures of departments that have turned single bays into double bays doing that exact thing.
That's
Stabilizer is not weak, and it will take a whole lot with it.
Hey, I didn't take the building out.
That's not
There's still time, Donnie. There's still time.
Someone else took the building out.
So, please, do your walk around. Make sure your truck is in a road configuration. Doors are closed, steps are stowed, wheel chucks are put away, ground pads are put away. Also, if you guys get into a situation where the door open alarms are malfunctioning. So it's telling you a door is open and you went and visually confirmed it and it's closed and it's the sensor error. Talk to the dealer, get that fixed. Don't get complacent with that. Don't ignore it. If you figure out how to silence it, don't just sit there and silence it. Reason I pull up that story or pull that up is because of the story I just heard recently where a department had a compartment here in the rear that the sensor was bad. And they got very, very used to that warning going off saying that compartment was open. Well, someone threw their air pack in there, got in the cab, and said that door was open. Well, they're used to it, so they silenced it and went to drive away. That air pack flipped out and landed cap side down, blew the cap side off that air tank, went into the car behind them. Luckily for the lady driving, it hit her engine, not her windshield. Totaled out the car. It's a lot of momentum flying through the air there. So don't get complacent with it. I understand safety systems can be annoying sometimes, but they are there for a reason, and they will save you more often than they're a hassle at the end of the day.
So right now on the truck we have up there, the back compartment is showing open.
Yep, I talked to him
So
yesterday.
it's going back
That needs
Monday to
be
get
adjusted.
fixed, but just so you guys know, when you start driving today, you will see that.
So if I have a sensor that's erroneous, first I'm gonna have the dealer fix it. But until it's fixed, I look at that compartment every time. Now, I drive these trucks quite a bit back at the factory. I walk around. The sensors are nice, but I walk around that truck every time before I move it. It's a minute of my time that can save, well, for me, save my job. For you guys, save a life.
Is there one sensor for all the doors, or everyone's separate? So it will tell you what door is open?
I'm very.
It does say that it's the rear door, but I don't know if all the side
I would
doors.
have to check. There's different.
It'll
levels of it.
specifically tell you if it's the rear
Which
door, the
one's
mid
open?
door, the front door. If the ladder's down, it'll tell you the ladder's down. If you pull out the pump panel step, it'll tell you the pump panel step is out. Yeah, it gets specific.
So that'll show before you drive away.
Yeah.
The-
Yeah, I'll show
There's
you.
a big
platform's out.
When you look at that screen, he'll show us. There's a do not move truck screen, and it'll show you what's wrong. You shouldn't move the truck. Stabilizer's out.
But once again, it won't stop you from not driving it
I
out.
know, yeah, like you said, once you stop.
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
when you-
it's being an emergency vehicle. We don't stop you from moving it. So I don't know. Let's say there's a bad sensor on a stabilizer. You confirmed it's stowed. We're still going to let you drive it because I'm not going to restrict that vehicle from moving. If it was a mail truck, it's a little different. But being an emergency vehicle is a little more important for it to move. Just requires you to visually confirm it at that point that it is stowed.
It's like the air cooling light for the last 2 months in San
Wheel chocks. This vehicle has the ability to completely lift itself off the ground. Preferably, we like to keep at least one axle worth of rubber in contact with the ground. We're going uphill, front axle, downhill, rear axle. Preferably, if I have the option with this truck, I'm always going to park it going uphill. It's easier to set the stabilizers. It's always a better set to go uphill. I talked about that front axle limitation. I need to double check your limitation in our system, but your truck, as of right now, is a very short limitation. It is 36 feet, which for all intents and purposes is 2 feet from fully retracted. So if that front axle's off the ground, straight off the truck at 0 degrees, you're limited to 36 feet. It's very short. It's due to the weight on the truck. That's all we could allow for it. I need to double check just to make sure that is accurate. But that means your truck is much better for you to keep that front axle in contact with the ground. Now, obviously we need to keep the wheel chocks on the axle that's in contact with the ground. Something to note with wheel chocks in general. Anytime you guys flip up a cab, you should be throwing wheel chocks. Now this truck, you should be throwing them anyways because you're putting the ladder in the air in order to flip that up. But for any of your trucks, I'm going to recommend if you're flipping that cab up, throw your wheel chocks. It's a minute that can save you a whole lot of embarrassment. We had a truck down in, I think it was Alabama, Georgia, somewhere down the south there. They flipped the cab up on one of our pumpers, and there was a binder in the back seat that somehow perfectly fell and hit the park brake. Truck rolled 100 feet and center punched a telephone pole. It was kind of lucky for them because if it would have missed that, it was going off a small cliff into a marsh. Last thing we need to do is call brass of why we need a rotator to come pull our pumper out of the marsh. So take that extra minute to throw your wheel chocks before you flip up a cab. Now if you're going uphill or downhill, you can put them on the downhill side of the axle, or if you're on flat ground, you can do front back like that. The ground pads here, they're designed to spread load on a surface, not to bridge over gaps. So we're not using those to bridge over culverts, ditches, any openings in the ground, big potholes, stuff like that. Putting them on a solid surface, spreading the load with the ground pad. We don't want to come down on top of manhole covers, storm drains. Any of your underground utility access is not designed to support the weight of a truck like this. Something, because of a trip I had in upstate New York, I like to bring up is be aware of how your city makes underground utility repairs. They dig the road up out here to do a water main repair. When they're done, do they compact that gravel like they should? Do they pave as thick as the original road? If you don't have confidence in that, try to avoid setting your stabilizers on that. We had a truck that ended up pushing about 8 to 10 inches down into a repair because that city did not properly compact the gravel after that repair. It's not a good feeling as an operator to see a stabilizer push like that. So try to avoid setting up on top of there if you don't have the confidence in that. Gotta make sure we get close enough to the scene where we can hit our objective, but we don't want to be so close where we end up becoming part of the scene itself. One of the big goals with the Ascendant program in general was to make a lighter ladder. Now if you stack the 107 next to a 105, 107 is dramatically lighter than the 105. But at the end of the day, this is an aerial apparatus. We need a certain amount of counterweight on the truck to counteract the forces of having that ladder at a low angle, fully extended with tip load out there. That makes this truck heavy at the end of the day. It's lighter than the 105, but at the end of the day, it's still a heavy truck. So we need to be on top of a surface that can support a firm and stable surface. I cannot assure stability on grass, dirt, your uncompacted surfaces. If you drop a stabilizer in someone's front yard, I cannot give you any assurances as far as stability goes. I don't know the compaction of their yard, I don't know the moisture content, there's too many variables there that I can't control for. Hot asphalt, as we know, when asphalt gets real hot, it becomes more pliable, something we need to be aware of. We don't want to set stabilizers on the very edges of roads. That's the very edge of the compaction that has the highest likelihood to slough off of that compaction there, so try to back it off from that very from the edge there. Make sure we're level to their safe operating parameters. Check for your overhead obstructions, power lines, stuff like that. Never position on or near a railroad track or an active runway. If you've seen the video of Detroit's truck getting hit by a train, again, not a phone call we want to make why we don't have an aerial anymore. So some of the benefits to the computer system now is going to be setup preview or grade slope confirmation. With the park brake pushed in, you can be drive, neutral, that doesn't matter. If I reach up and I hit my aerial master switch, the light behind that switch is going to start flashing. My cab display is going to switch over to this screen here. Now if I look at this, it's going to tell me my current grade and my current slope. Now I also have these green check marks here. The truck understands obviously the current grade and current slope it's sitting at. It also understands how long its stabilizers are. It's calculating with the length of stabilizer it has if it's able to get to 100% setup, 50%, or you're not going to be able to fly the aerial at all. So if I see 2 green check marks here, I'm going to be able to get to 100% tip load setup. If I see a yellow triangle on either one of these, I'll be at a 50% tip setup. If I see a red stop sign on either one of these, it's telling me I need to find a different place to set up. I don't have enough stabilizer to correct for that grade and slope. There are some limitations to the system. If I'm next to a sudden drop off, it doesn't know that. If the ground changes suddenly from the current grade and slope I'm sitting at underneath one of the stabilizers, it doesn't necessarily know that. It's assuming the ground is somewhat uniform from what it's seeing here. Also, it doesn't take into account for how far I can extend my beams. If we're parked next to a car, it doesn't know that's there. Now, if you have used that system, when you set the park brake, the aerial master will just come on full at that point. If not, you'll reach over, hit your aerial master, aerial PTO, engage your front wheel lock if you haven't already. if you engage the water pump, that takes away high idle control from the aerial. Obviously, pump panel takes priority over RPM control. If you get on a scene where you're pumping water and you're not flying the aerial, but you think there's a possibility you might, when you engage the water pump, at least reach over and engage your aerial PTO. You don't even need to turn on aerial master, but just let that PTO spin throughout that call. If you get into a situation where you're pumping water and you need to fly the aerial and you haven't had that engaged already, you are able to engage that aerial PTO up to 5,000 RPM. So it's about up to twice the red line of the truck. So if you get into that odd situation, I don't know, you're fighting a dumpster fire and that progresses into a building and you need to throw up defensive, you can reach over and engage this with the truck sitting at wide open throttle. Now, we don't want to make a routine habit of that. We want to use that in that emergency situation. Preferably, every time, if we have the option, we should be engaging that at a baseline idle. Any questions so far?
Keep rolling.
Getting into setting the stabilizers here. Come back here, again, should be checking for my overhead obstructions, making sure I'm not going to be coming down on top of anything I shouldn't be. We're going to pull the controller out of here and activate the stabilizer power here. Now there's two different kinds of setups we talk about, soft setups and hard setups. Soft setups are where we're retaining a lot of weight down on our axles. Hard setup, I know the old definition was take the bulge out of the tire. We switched that to breaking contact with the rear axles. So you could take a piece of paper and slide it underneath the rear axles. That's a textbook hard setup. First setup I'm going to talk about here is going to be most likely a soft setup. So if we're in a flat parking lot, the way I go about this setup is going to most likely lead to a soft setup. So I'm going to fully extend my beam here, so I'm running that out. Once it hits the end of its extension, it's going to turn on that light. The stabilizer alarm will not turn off for that function. Sounds odd, but it comes into play here when I bring this jack down. So I'm going to hold lower on this jack. It's going to come down. It's going to make contact with the ground. It's going to stop moving the stabilizer, and then it's going to turn off the stabilizer alarm and turn this light on. There's no rush to get your finger off of there. As you get used to the system, hold lower, don't let go. It's going to come down, make contact, hold for at least a second past that stabilizer alarm turning off, just to kind of get that timing down in your head. At that point, I'll go over on the other side of the truck, do the same thing, fully extend that beam, hold lower. Again, it's going to come down, make contact, stop. Once it's in contact with the ground, again, it'll turn off that stabilizer alarm and turn this light on. At that point, now that I have these two on the ground, I'm just going to grab and hold level assist here. While I'm holding level assist, it's going to make sure the truck's level side to side. It's going to deploy the rear two stabilizers for me, get those in contact with the ground, make sure the truck's level front to back, side to side. Then it's going to turn off the stabilizer alarm. Again, no rush to get your finger off of here. Once it gets in contact, has all those in contact, and it's happy with the setup, it'll stop blaring the alarm, stop moving the truck. You're good to go. No rush to get your finger off of there. If your finger slips off in the middle of a level assist, you have to stop because someone's in the way, you don't like what the truck's doing. You can let go of level assist at any point and then grab it again and it'll continue where it was. Setups, or the level assist is pretty robust that way, where you can stop in the middle of it and grab it again and it'll pick up where it left off. Any questions with that? Now if I wanted to go to a hard set, before I brought down using level assist, after I got these in contact, I would actually grab those in unison and run those down together in unison and add about 2 or 3 inches of jack penetration there, and then grab level assist. So I'm promoting a taller setup that would most likely get me into a hard set. With these jacks, well, with any of these jacks here, when they're in the air and you hold down, they'll come down, make contact, stop. Now that they're in contact with the ground, if you let go and reapply, it's going to keep pushing that jack down till you let go or till it runs out of stabilizer throw at that point. Now if you're in contact with the ground, you pick it off the ground and hold down again, it'll come down, make contact, stop. If you're moving other jacks and it causes you to lift this stabilizer up off the ground, if you hold down on it, it's going to come down, make contact, stop. So there's no rush to, when you're in the air, there's no rush to get your finger off coming down. It's going to stop once it makes contact. But once it's in contact with the ground, if you apply it, it's going to keep driving until you let go or till it runs out of beam.
Does the auto assist, the auto level, does that work in a short jack situation?
Yeah.
too?
The only thing that cares about how far that beam is extended is the rotation of the aerial. It's the only thing that cares. Level assist, every other part works exactly the same. Short jack. Again, short jack,
There you go.
you're not able to operate on the short jack side of the truck. Everything being equal, full weight, full water on the non-short jack side. You'll get about 7 degrees of rotation into the short jack side, but it's nothing to write home about. Short jack system on this truck, this is not progressive. It's all or nothing. You're either fully extended or you're not. I don't care if you're a half inch shy or you didn't extend that at all. Short jack is short jack. You cannot operate on that side. Now you can purposely short jack it if you want to. If you got high voltage line or for some reason you do not want the aerial rotating to one side of the truck, you could purposely short jack it if you wanted to, and now the truck's not going to let you go to that side. Back to the factory, with every truck, your truck included in this, we do third-party testing with Underwriters Laboratory, or UL. One of the tests we do with them is the stability test. We take your truck with no water in the tank, no ground ladders, no gear in it. Realistically, it's as light as you guys could possibly make the truck without ripping body panels off. At that point, we take it, set the stabilizers down as softly as we can on the ground where it still allows us to fly the aerial. So very, very soft set. Take your ladder fully extended, 0 degrees, hang tip load, plus tooling rating, plus 50% off the tip of your ladder and swing it 360 degrees around the truck. Truck must maintain 3 points of contact during this, whether that be 2 tires and a stabilizer, 2 stabilizers and a tire, it doesn't matter, just needs to maintain those points of contact. That's why I so confidently can say if you follow load chart to a T, you set up on a surface that can handle the weight of the truck, and you don't touch overrides when you shouldn't be, this truck will not tip over because it's been tested. Something I would have noticed during this testing, and you guys may notice during a softer setup with a heavier tip, is non-working side stabilizer lift. Now if you're not used to that, that can be disheartening, but that is fine. I'm concerned what my working side stabilizers are doing, not what my non-working side are doing. If you see a stabilizer up in the air because you're doing a lower operation with a heavy tip and a soft setup, do not ever use an override or manual control to bring that stabilizer back down to the ground. The only time we ever move a stabilizer is with the ladder in the cradle. Best case scenario, if you do move that with an override and bring that back down to the ground, when you go to put the ladder back in the cradle, the truck's going to be all jacked up weird. Worst case scenario is that stabilizer could come down with enough force when it impacts the ground, could cause the whole truck to roll over. So do not ever move a stabilizer with the ladder in the air. Don't exceed your load limits. Use discretion when operating in or near an electrical storm. Approach victim from above during rescue. Operator must know the condition of the aerial device. Make sure man-saver bars are working correctly. Operator must be at turntables controls during all aerial operations, and personnel on ladder should wear safety belts at all times. So I talked within our operating parameters. Within or up to 3.5 degrees of slope and up to 5.5 degrees of grade, you can operate this ladder at 100% tip load. You do not need to level this to 0-0. That's no longer a thing with our products. As long as you're within that, you're good. 100% tip load, same throw, same elevation. Now if you get above 3.5 degrees of slope, up to 5.5 degrees, or above 5.5 degrees of grade, up to 6.5 degrees of grade, you are taking your load chart and cutting it in half. Same throw, same elevation, same water, just cutting your load chart in half. Now if you get above 5.5 degrees of slope or 6.5 degrees of grade, ladder isn't even going to let you pull it out of the cradle. It'll just lock you out at that point. It'll say unstable conditions. Something else to keep in mind, if you're at say 3 degrees of slope and you're operating to the low side of the truck and you start putting a lot of weight out there, that chassis is going to rotate because at the end of the day this becomes a giant lever. As you put weight here, that's going to pull up on the chassis and end up rotating the chassis. If you rotate the chassis to that 3.5 degrees or more, you need to be cutting your load chart in half. So it's not what the setup originally started at, it's what the truck is currently sitting at that dictates where you are on this. Something to note with these are plastic RV levels that say Pierce on them. People can kick them, hit them, throw them out of adjustment. They are not the end-all be-all, they are a reference guide for you. The truck uses its own internal sensors to determine where it is on this. In your load chart here, 50-mile-an-hour wind condition, dry waterway from -10 up to 29 degrees. I'm allotted 750 pounds at the egress. According to the NFPA, a firefighter weighs 250 pounds in full gear. So the egress, that little red 2-rung section at the end of the ladder, according to the NFPA, I can stick 3 guys there. Well, that's a little unrealistic, a little comfortable. So, say I got a guy in the egress, I throw a guy on the fly, and I throw a guy in the upper mid. Because I didn't use that full 750 pounds of the egress, I can redistribute the leftover down the ladder. Now once I get the ladder elevated between 30 and 39 degrees, I'm also allotted 500 pounds down here at the base section. So if I got a guy at the egress, guy at the fly, guy at the upper mid, I can also have 2 guys on the base section. Now in order for them to start ascending, I need to remove weight up the ladder. So the guy in the egress and the guy on the fly, they both get off. Now those 2 people on the base section can start ascending. All this to say, if you don't use it above, you can redistribute the leftover down, but you can never redistribute leftover weight below up the ladder. So in all reality, if you want to add this all up and throw it on the base section, go for it. Any questions with that? Once you charge the waterway, you see the capacities go down. We have to account for the weight of the water in the waterway. Big thing to note with this egress capacity here, that 500 pounds, when we go above the waterway center line into a storefront attack, that is zeroed out. This capacity goes to 0 once we get above that waterway center line for a storefront. As far as flowing water here, 0 to 1,000 gallons a minute, up to a 35-mile-an-hour wind, full range on the monitor, move it as much as you need to. Once we get above 1,000 to 1,500 gallons a minute, up to a 35-mile-an-hour wind, we're limiting a 40-degree sweep left and right. We're trying to limit how much side loading we're putting on the ladder. 0 to 1,500 gallons a minute, and that 36 to 50-mile-an-hour wind, we're limiting a 30-degree sweep left and right. Again, trying to limit the side loading when we get into those higher wind conditions. There is nothing to yell at you for going past this, stop you from going past this. This is something you solely as an operator are responsible for. As far as flowing water while moving the ladder, spin the thing in circles all day if you want, raise and lower as much as you want, extends fine, retract is where we gotta stop and think about it. In a perfect world, I could retract full speed, flowing 1,500 gallons a minute. The issue you could run into is the relief underneath the truck. If there's corrosion in there, some animal decide to make a home in there, ice, debris, for some reason that relief does not open as far or as fast as it should, you can end up damaging the gland seals or the extension retraction system on the ladder. So what I'm going to recommend, if you need to retract while flowing water on this, do not do full speed at 1,500 gallons a minute. Do quarter speed at 700 gallons a minute. Slow it down, relax the speeds, don't move as fast. Best policy is to never move or retract while flowing water. You do have the ability to do it though if you need to. Icing load chart. This is the one I was talking about earlier. This is rated with up to a 1/4 inch of ice covering the entire aerial. But our capacities go down severely when that happens. We're counting for a lot of weight at this point. But if we end up in icing conditions, this is what we need to reference. Also, we are not doing any storefront attacks. So we're not doing this at all when we end up in those icing conditions. We don't have the water left over, or the weight capacity left over to deal with the reactionary force of that. Once we get up onto the turntable, flip over the console cover, set your intercom volume, set your screen you want to operate on, set your lighting. Start to raise out of the cradle. Pretty much the moment you leave the cradle, you can start extending if you want to, but you're going to have to come up out of the cradle about 3 or 4 degrees before you can start rotating left or right. It's It's part of the collision avoidance program, keep you from hitting the cradle or anything else on your roof. With the ladder fully retracted, with the aerial speed set to fast, above 0 degrees of elevation, the ladder will do a 360 in 45 seconds. If you extend the ladder out at all, it goes to a 100-second rotation. And then if you have it normal, it's about a 120-second rotation. Going back down into the cradle, there is no turntable alignment arrow on this ladder. If you want something similar, use the side of the turntable to the side of the truck and make them parallel. It's close enough. In all reality, you need to have that ladder within 6 degrees left or right of the cradle. So the outside of the ladder within the bounds of the outside of the cab, that's close enough. You need the ladder fully retracted and the monitor stowed. If it's not fully retracted or the monitor is not stowed and you try to do the rest of this process, it's going to stop you at about 4 or 5 degrees of elevation and tell you to either stow the monitor or retract the ladder. So if you have the ladder fully retracted, monitor in the stowed position, within that 6 degrees, your job is to hold lower. That's it. As you come down, once it gets below 10 degrees, it'll start aligning itself with the cradle. It'll continue lowering. If it doesn't hit its alignment target by the time it gets down to 4 degrees, it'll stop lowering, finish the rotation, and then continue lowering down into the cradle. Once it contacts the cradle, hold down for an extra 3 to 5 seconds for down pressure. You want to make sure we get it firm into that cradle. If you don't, you will feel it going down the road. That thing will start pounding on the top of the cab. Not hit the cab, but it's not going to be a comfortable ride. It's going to be pounding into that cradle. That's abusive on the ladder. It also provides a pretty terrible ride at that point. In all reality, you can hold lower for a half an hour and all you're going to do is make hot hydraulic oil. You're not going to damage anything. There's a relief that doesn't allow you to overpressure it into the cradle. Something to note with the cradle. You look at it, you're going to see the red metal ears, and then there's going to be polymer pads to the inside of those. Those polymer pads are there for a reason. The tolerance we have in the cradle is about the thickness of a debit card. It is a very tight tolerance in that cradle. You're going to hit those polymer pads 9 times out of 10. That's normal. That's the reason why the polymer pads are there. We tighten up the cradle for 2 reasons. A, the ladder moves less while you're driving around, provides a better ride. Also, the equivalent backlash on the gear set, the cradle tolerance is tighter, so it's less abusive on the gear set back there, so that lasts longer. With the bedding system on here, if we put the same cradle we used to put on the 105s on this, the thing would never touch the side of the cradle because that thing has days of clearance. This one, we tightened it up a lot, so if it's hitting the polymer pads, that's normal. If it tries to set down on top of a metal ear, then that's something we need to tell the dealer that they need to reset the centering point on the ladder, but it's not a common thing to happen. So getting into these displays here, these are touch screens, but not like your cell phone. If you have gloves on, you can still utilize them. That means they're pressure sensitive. With them being pressure sensitive, it doesn't mean you need to push a little bit harder than you would on your cell phone. It doesn't mean you need to punch your hand through the screen, but you gotta be a little bit more firm with it. You have the rubber buttons down here at the bottom, and then your digital buttons here. So the home button here, that takes you back to this screen. Menu button here pops up a little menu here, and page button here, that's gonna cycle you through the screens that I'm gonna show you here. Flow rate here, this is going to tell you how much water is going through the waterway. It won't tell you any other part of the pump, just what's going through the waterway. You have your rung alignment here. So when your rungs are not aligned, it appears like this. When they're aligned, that red portion turns green and the gray portion aligns underneath it. Your device angle here tell you the angle of the aerial. This little picture here though is a static picture, does not move along with you. In the center here, we have what we call our active load chart. So as you move your device around, as the angle changes, whether you're at 100% tip load, 50% tip load, whether or not you're flowing water, this is going to change to show you what the hard load chart would tell you, just in an easier format to read. In no way, shape, or form is this a load sense device. Will not tell you how much weight is on the ladder. We do not sell a product with load sense on it. So it is solely the job of the operator to understand the load on his ladder. This is just an easier way to read the load chart. There are two conditions this will not update properly for. One of those is if you fill the waterway, but it's not moving any water, so you're not seeing a flow rate, this will not stay on the wet load chart. Because it's not seeing a flow rate, it'll revert back to the dry load chart. Not that it's super common to stagnate water in a waterway, but something to be aware of. Also icing, this won't switch over to the icing load chart. There's just no good way for the ladder to know the amount of ice that's on it. So hit that page button, it's going to start cycling you through here. We have our aerial reach screen, so 60 degrees, your hydraulic temp, your hydraulic pressure, your aerial angle, 34 feet, that's going to be the physical extension of the sections themselves. 35 feet is your horizontal reach, so from the back here to the tip of the ladder, it's doing your Pythagorean theorem for you, figuring out exactly how long your horizontal reach is. And then 10 foot here is going to be your vertical reach. Top of the egress here to the ground, but I put a gigantic asterisk next to that. See, this number, and this number, I can control all the variables in those situations. This one, I cannot. Ground's a variable I cannot control for. If there is a 10-foot building there, it does not know. It's still going to tell you 10 feet. Also, let's say this number is perfectly accurate and you try to lower that ladder down and make that number 0. You're going to shove your monitor and your fly section into the ground before that number is 0. Because it's measuring from the top to the ground. This screen is a great reference guide for you as an operator to understand approximately where your aerial is in space. Do not use this as a sole tool to operate though. I've seen this screen cause more people to run their aerial into the ground than just about anything else. With the collision avoidance program, big goal with that is you don't have to pay attention to not hitting the truck as much. You can pay more attention to the end of your ladder where your bigger risks are. So we're trying to promote looking at the tip of your ladder while you're operating. We've seen this screen before, but now that we're up on the turntable with the ladder set up, the green check marks here, those are going to be our current conditions, not our potential conditions. So 2 green check marks, 100% tip capacity, yellow triangle on either one of those, 50% tip capacity, red stops on either one of those, it's not even going to let me fly the aerial. Our stabilizers, if they are fully extended and planted, they're going to show up green. If they're short jack and planted, they show up yellow. If they are red, that means they are not planted but they're not stowed. And if they don't appear at all, that means they're in the stowed position. Then we have our aerial limitation screen. So as I rotate and extend, this ladder is going to follow along with me. As I elevate and extend, this ladder will follow along with me. If I have the truck short jacked on one side, it's going to red out that side of the truck. In all reality, this screen was developed for the single axle 107 product because that has some limitations off the front axle, but we included all our Ascendant programs. Now when I talked about that front axle limitation, so you lift the front axle off the ground, it limits how far you can extend off the front. That does not appear on the screen because that varies truck to truck. That's set individually in each truck. They haven't got the programming done in order to visually show that properly every time. So that will not appear on here. That front axle limitation I talked about. Once you lift that front axle up off the ground, the reason we limit off the front is we don't want you to teeter-totter off those front stabilizers down onto that front axle. When that is set, we set a tip load and a half, I think. I put a big steel block at the end of it and I figure out where exactly that tipping point starts. So pretty much the moment you lift that off, it's going to limit you. Your ladder is currently set at 36 feet from the pivot pins for the base section out straight in front of the truck is 36 feet. Now the best way to envision that is I have a 10-story building 36 feet off from the pins on the front or on the back of the truck there. I can reach out and I can touch that point, but I cannot go through it. So if I raise up more, I can extend out more, or if I was turned over, I could extend out more. But straight in front of me, that perpendicular building, I can only reach out and touch it.
So I'll be able to extend 36 feet, or does that include the length of the ladder too?
That, so it's
So like you said, it's like 2.5
Yeah, it's
feet
physical.
more than what the ladder is already.
it fully retracted that ladder. I'm fairly certain yours is 34 feet, but it's not much. And I got to double check today to see, just to make sure that wasn't put in wrong. I can check the records and see what it was entered in as the factory. But it could just be the weighting of your truck with where your pump panel is and all that. Because you have more weight beyond where that stabilizer is, it makes it to where you don't have as much to overcome with it in the rear. So I've had trucks before that were 36. I've also had trucks that were 76 foot. They just also had a rear steer and a ton more weight in the rear. So it's per truck setting.
Yeah.
So with it, if 36 feet is accurate, I'm gonna recommend you guys always set that going uphill. Or I'm gonna show you guys how to set it up where we don't use the level system. We're not trying to get it perfectly level. If I have to set up going downhill, I'm not gonna try to pick that front end up. I'm gonna keep that front end in contact just because I don't wanna deal with that front axle limitation. So if I hit that menu button, it pops up a menu right here. Center of the screen, there's going to be a diagnostics button. If I click on that, it brings me to a menu with two options, command zone and live data. If I click on live data, it's going to bring me up to the screen. Real live data has a ton more information than this, but I can see my aerial hours, my PTO hours, and then what we call total water use. Total water use is a running count of how much water has gone through the waterway. Does not reset with key cycles. If you guys never reset it, it's going to count for the life of the truck. You hit the menu button here, pops up the menu again. Up on the top of the screen, there's going to be an aerial, or over on this side of the screen, there's going to be an aerial calibrations button. The menu that brings you to, you only have one option, which is water flow. Brings you to here. If you want to reset that total water use, you click on that button. Keep in mind though, if you reset that number is gone forever. I cannot come in with my laptop and recover that number. So, if someone's trying to keep track of that, write it down before you reset it. So you look here and here, there's these little tabs right here. You click on those up on the turntable, it brings up this screen. You can run your water monitor through the display. So for whatever reason there was an issue with the switches and they broke, it's a backup way to run the water monitor. Also down in your cab, if you do the same thing, you're able to run your emergency lights and your scene lighting through the display. So if the switch panel went out, it's just a backup way to run them. Pinnable system. You're able to pin your monitor either underneath your fly section or back a section to clean up the tip for rescue operation. My warning with the system, always as an operator be aware what position it's locked in and that it is locked in that position. If you leave this pinnable unlocked from both sections, extending or retracting ladder, you can damage the pinnable, this bracketry here. Last time I checked, that was about $2,000 to replace. Getting a little bit worse, monitor is about $8,000, waterway is about $15,000. You can rip that off pretty easy, causing quite a bit of damage there. Worst case scenario, if you have that ladder kicked up, we'll say 30 degrees, extend it out, and as you extend it out, this pinnable will happen to stay back, but it's unlocked with the other section. And you charge that waterway. When that water hits, that can cause that whole pinnable to rocket off the end of the ladder and kill someone, because it has killed someone in the past. It's about 40 pounds worth of metal flying through the air. So as an operator, I'm always 100% aware of what position it's locked in. Now you can change it from one section to the other. I don't care what elevation. The only restriction I have is it's fully retracted and you don't have the waterway charged. But you want to change it at full elevation, tip down by the ground. If you're of the taller persuasion, you can do it off the front bumper. I'm too short to do that, but just make sure you are fully retracted. Basis of the system here is you have a control handle here that rotates a cam. The cam changes the length of this latch. So if you rotate this handle back to about the noon, 11 o'clock position, that'll loosen this latch on the hook here and you're able to rotate it back. rotate this back to the noon, 1 o'clock position, and push it down into this hook. Now there's this little detent right here. It's a little spring-loaded piece, you gotta push that past. If you don't have it lined up real good, it takes quite a bit of force. You're not gonna break it, but unless you have it lined up real nice, you gotta kind of push pretty hard on it to get it in there. Once you get it down past that, down into the hook here, you rotate this to the rear. The hook and the latch and the control handle should be in the same direction when you're in the locked position. Most common thing I see, especially with when you guys get new people, is you tell them to swap it and they just come over here, grab the handle and do this. And that's all you've done is loosen it at that point. You haven't actually moved it. You have your lift eye here. Slides in one side, then slot back the other. Pins go in a downward position. It's rated for 750 pounds straight lift. Don't try to pull a car out of the ditch with this. Don't side load it. 750 pounds if you have that in your load chart. If you have someone standing on the end of your egress here, you do not have 750 pounds available to you, so keep that in mind. You can crane stuff with this. If you got to pick a Stokes basket, that's perfectly fine. My warning with that, if you're picking a Stokes basket or anything else like that, run a control line so your victim's not doing this. Also, keep in mind if that load catches on something, either what that load caught on, the load itself, the rope, or the stability of the truck are going to be what fails. This truck has more than enough power to pull itself over if no other lines in that, or no other pieces of that chain end up failing. So keep in mind, don't let your load catch on things as you're lifting. Also, your egress here. If you look at how this egress is attached to the end of the fly section, it's attached with 4 half-inch grade 8 bolts. It is not a intentionally weak piece of the ladder. It is not a crumple zone. It is not a breaching tool. It is rated to hang 750 pounds off the very end of it. Do not use this to push through windows, walls, garage doors, anything like that. That's not what it's designed for. The reason why this is a separate section at the end of the ladder is, let's say you get the new guy up there with the bed saw and he gets a little wild with it and swings and ends up impacting the ladder. If it was one piece, now you have to replace the whole fly section. That's a lot more money. That takes a lot longer. At least with the egress being a separate section, now you're just replacing that egress. It's a lot cheaper, can happen a lot quicker. So it's that, hopefully if something happens to the tip of the ladder, it only damages that, but it's not a guarantee. Don't punch it into things. If you punch this into a wall, it translates the load directly down to the next section. I've seen a ladder we had to replace sections on. If you look down the handrails of the fly section, they were warped 2 to 3 inches in each direction because of repetitive shock loading as they used it as a breaching tool. So please, don't try to punch through stuff with this. It's not what it's designed for. So again, get it down to the cradle, make sure you add that down pressure, close up the console cover, turn off your lighting. Picking up your stabilizers. So I always like to pick up stabilizers in sets. It's not that the truck can't handle the twisting, but it's the less twisting I do on it, the longer life. If you pick up one at a time, it's not that the truck's going to die today. It's just 15, 20 years down the road. That's when that wear and tear really starts to hit, is in those long terms. So I always try to pick up in sets. Now I'm going to pick up my rears first. If I'm in a super high setup, I'll do the rears a little bit, then the fronts, then go back to the rears. But I'll get the rears, get them all the way raised, then I'll do my fronts, get them raised, and then when I pull in my beams, I'm doing one beam all the way in, and then the other side of the truck, beam all the way in. Before I get into the beams quick, don't try to lift your front, especially from a taller setup, don't take your front stabilizers and lift those off the ground with your rears deployed. We don't want to hang the chassis between the front axle and the rear stabilizers. Again, it's not that it's going to kill it, but that's a lot of flexing you end up putting on those frame rails. The beams, when I'm extending the beams or retracting the beams, I'm always watching the beam I am moving. So I'm doing one and then the other. Now the reason for this, extending out, I had a customer that they were on the driver's side, they extended both beams at the same time. You have the physical ability to do that. But what he didn't realize was the officer side, that stabilizer was in line with the back end of the Camry, pushed the Camry into the curb and then proceeded to rip half the trunk of the Camry off. Destroyed the panel on the outrigger, and also the owner wasn't too happy about their car. Also, retracting back in, tops of those stabilizer beams are horizontal surfaces. People love setting stuff on horizontal surfaces. I've seen radios, jackets, helmets, all that get crushed in those. That stabilizer is not going to stop for your radio. Also, if there's a kid down in by that stabilizer or someone else that shouldn't be there, that stabilizer is not going to stop for a human body. It'll go right through them. So always be watching the beam you're moving. If you really wanted to get into it, if you had a spotter watching that beam for you, fine. But you need to trust that spotter with everything at that point, because if there's something there and they don't stop you, at the end of the day, you're the one with the sticks, it's your fault. Once you get all of the stabilizers into the stowed position, that stabilizer not stowed light will turn off. It'll also turn off the stabilizer alarm. Again, make sure the truck is in its road configuration before we drive away. Everything's put away, everything's shut, everything's packed up. And manual controls here. First part of the system I'm going to talk about is the emergency stop here. So you have one down at the stabilizer and one on the turntable control console. These are more or less a big mushroom switch. Push down to activate, quarter turn clockwise to deactivate it. They'll pop back out. You have to reset them from where they're set at. Whenever at least one of them is set, this light will turn on, as well as you'll get a warning on the display. Whenever one of these are active, it disables these hydraulic controls as well as your stabilizer control. When you go to reset it, after you spin it out, pop it back out, it's about 1/8 of a second, and the system's all the way back operational. There's no other delay, nothing else you have to do to reset it. Good way to envision this, there's a circuit that goes down to here and then back. If that circuit's broken at any point, ladder stops moving. Hydraulics stop operating. You retain all your lights, intercom, monitor, all that stuff still works. None of that gets turned off. It just stops your hydraulic functions. I use this system constantly. Anytime I have someone ascending or descending my ladder, I hit this. It's just a little insurance factor that ladder does not move without my permission. If I'm the operator on the console and I drop my helmet, or for some reason I gotta get off the turntable, grab that, come back up, I hit that while I'm gone. Again, just to make sure it doesn't move. If you guys are set up doing an event for the public, you got kids or just regular civilians running around, truck running or not, I end up hitting one of these e-stops just because that's an extra step someone would have to figure out in order to move something they shouldn't be moving in the first place. It just gives you a little insurance factor there. So getting into the override here. Anytime an override or manual control is used, all safety systems are overridden. The operator must be sure that all safety operating parameters have been met. Do not ever use an override or manual control to rotate over a short jack. That's not what they're intended for. In all reality, with only one exception, the overrides and manual controls are to be used in a failure scenario. Something failed, something's not working, and that's causing the truck not to operate properly, so we're going to pack the truck up and take it and get it fixed. It's not just this safety feature is currently inconvenient for me, so I'm going to override it. That's not the intention. First one we talk about here is the global override switch here. We understand we took a truck, we put electronic sensors on it, and electronic sensors, while I think ours are pretty good, they can fail. They're not perfect. So if we were to have a failure of an electronic sensor, this is how we're going to get the truck back packed up so we can take it home and get it fixed. The collision avoidance system works off of a sensor for the grade slope for the truck, elevation sensor, extension sensor, and a rotation sensor for the ladder. Let's say that rotation sensor were to have a failure and it's no longer communicating. You'll get a warning on the display that'll say rotation sensor failure. At that point, it's going to stop you. It's not going to allow you to move the ladder because it no longer knows where it is in reference to the truck, so it's going to lock you out. At that point, I would have to have someone come down and hold this override switch for me while I run the normal controls up at the turntable. While this switch is being held, I have no collision avoidance, no bedding assistance, no short jack. At that point, it's a manual ladder. It won't stop me from running into itself at all. Also, there'll be an alarm and a visual alarm at the display telling you this. Associated with that, anytime the switch is active, this is time stamped in our system. So if you're holding this and 2 minutes later the truck's laying on top of its short jack side, you'll be able to figure out what you're doing pretty quickly. So don't try to abuse the switch. Does require 2 people to be running it. That means 2 people need to think it's a good idea. 2 people can be wrong at the same time. Has to be held the entire time. Again, do not ever try to use this to change stabilizer sets with the aerial in the air. Whenever the switch is depressed, you're knowingly bypassing all safeties and interlocks. You're responsible for all damage and injuries done at that point. The one situation I talked about where this might be used in a actual failure situation is if you're set up on a slope and you're really correcting for a slope. And I've only had this happen once with a tandem axle back at the factory. I've only actually been able to get it to do it once. But if you're correcting for a very, very steep slope, you can get into a situation where there ends up being a little bit of twist in the frame compared to the torque box, and the cradle for the ladder ends up being twisted a little bit, and it's not necessarily exactly in the same spot for the home position as it normally would be. So when you try to bend the ladder, it tries to come down on top of it here. At that point, I would have someone hold that override switch for me. I'd move it over and put it down into the cradle. Exceedingly rare on tandem axles. Single axles, it's not common, but it can happen easier on single axles. Tandem, I bring it up just because I've had it happen once, so good to get the information out there. Getting into more of the EPU stuff here. So the EPU, this is more or less a starter motor with a 5 gallon a minute hydraulic pump on it, or 4 gallon a minute hydraulic pump on it. Nothing the EPU does is fast or glamorous, but it's there to pack us up if, just go to that slide, apparently this one doesn't strobe. It's there to pack us up to get us home. Really doesn't like this slide. You run it for 30 minutes straight, but then you need to let it cool down for 30 minutes. We only want to run the EPU when the main pump isn't running, otherwise the main pump and the little pump fight, the little pump loses that fight. We only want to activate the EPU after we have a function already open. Now there's 2 different sides to the EPU. There's going to be the aerial master activated side and the battery master activated side. The battery master activated side, that matters. If you activate the pump before the function is open, you're going to deadhead the pump. While it's not the end of the world, we want to limit how much we do that. The aerial master activated side, that doesn't matter because it won't actually start the pump till a function's open. Starting with the aerial master activated side, that's going to include this one and this one, or those 2 and this one. This is the safer side of the EPU. This is the side we prefer to use. So this is going to involve us having battery master, ignition, and aerial master on. This side of the system, we retain all our features. You can't move a stabilizer with the ladder in the air. Can't put the ladder in the air without stabilizers down on the ground. You have collision avoidance, bedding assistance, short jack protection, front axle protection. All your safeties are retained on this side of it. This would be used if, say, the bearing in your main PTO pump were to spin or emission system were to take your engine down. So you can't run it, the main pump, but the rest of the electronics still work. This is the system we're going to use. So if I want to move my beam here, I activate in on the beam, hold down on this, run it all the way in, release there, release on the beam. Pretty much you're operating exactly the same as you would have with the main system. You're just adding the step of activating the EPU pump for pressure. Bedding works exactly the same here. So you have your bedding assistance, that all works exactly the same. You're just adding, holding that switch while you're holding lower. Getting into the manual control compartment here. Make sure you've been trained in safe operation of this device. Be aware of the aerial position. Raising a jack with the aerial in the air can cause the truck to tip over. Use spotters. Where these blocks are low.
Fix your shit, Chris. What's going on? All right, man.
Use spotters. Where this block is located, you do not have visibility on all your stabilizers, so you need to be using spotters for those. Be aware all safety devices are being overridden. I swear it's some of the slides, which makes no sense at all. So anytime you end up in the manual control compartment, keep in mind, there are no safeties associated with this. When you open that compartment door, that's timestamped. If the aerial's in there, you'll actually get an audio alarm up at the console to let you know that. So as an operator, if you ever see a alarm for override door open or global override, so that red covered switch, if you ever see that and you're not expecting it, first thing you should do is hit the emergency stop. The red covered switch cannot override an emergency stop. The manual control compartment can, but it takes people a little bit longer. So if you're not expecting it, it's going to give you an opportunity to turn around and start barking at someone for touching something they shouldn't be. So this is going to be your battery master activated EPU switch here. So you're going to see there's an aerial side and a stabilizer side. The reason for that, oh come on, it's going to be this black diverter handle here. That diverter handle diverts fluid to either the stabilizer side of the block or to the aerial side of the block up above the swivel. During normal controls, the computer handles all that for you. But when we get into this side, this is kind of a catastrophic failure situation, so we're going to need to use this. All that's required for this to operate, again, is battery master. So if I wanted to move a stabilizer, I would activate, say I wanted my left beam in, I'm going to push down on that, push down on the stabilizer control, have my spotter watch that come in, get it all the way in, let go of the stabilizer, let go of the control. Now if you're operating the aerial, you'll have to have someone up on the turntable moving these controls while someone down below activates the switch here for them. Now you're going to try to open a function before they activate the switch and have them release the switch before you release the function, but I'd rather have you deadhead the EPU as opposed to running the ladder into something, so if the ladder's going to run into something, let go. During normal operations, these are manual hydraulic blocks. If you go in here, say with the aerial in there, and you grab onto these, that ladder is going to move in proportion to how you move that valve, with no regards for safety. We'll let you wipe the top of the cab off. That red override switch, I've seen somewhere in the neighborhood of about $100,000 worth of damage done. In that manual control compartment, I've seen the aftermath about $300,000 worth of damage done. If you ever need to touch an override or manual control, be 100% certain of what you're doing. If you're on a scene and you get into that situation, find the person with the most amount of brass and make it their decision. If you happen to be the one with the brass on that, if that truck does not need to immediately be moved to bring a different vehicle in on that scene, call the dealer. Make them send a mechanic out here. Just because they're going to be a little bit more well-versed at the risks and how that whole override system works, taking that responsibility off your shoulders a little bit. It's a good thing to know how to do it, but you don't have to do it if the scene doesn't depend on it. Also, I know on our older trucks, it used to be you should spin the EPU once a month, once a quarter. You don't necessarily need to do this on this truck, because every time you start this truck, as long as a few parameters are met, what it actually is going to do is it's going to activate your EPU and open the retract valve to pull and put pressure on the retract function of the ladder. This is so as you guys drive around, if you don't fly the ladder often, you don't get that ladder creep as it bumps out a little bit over time. We just added that function to prevent that. So the pump is going to cycle itself anyways. Any questions with that stuff? If you're curious on the maintenance schedule, that's will be available to you in your owner's manual. When you guys are inspecting the ladder, look for paint damage. You guys are by the seaboard here, so we want to watch for corrosion. Get that paint touched up sooner rather than later. Your wire rope cables, when those are assembled, those are internally greased. Do not spray pressure washers on wire rope cables. Do not spray pressure washers at the backside of electrical connections. You will make a nightmare for a mechanic somewhere at some point. Pressure washers, if you want to spray it at the paint, fine. Just keep it away from electrical connections, your grease components, your wire rope cables. Also, the wire rope cables, those are twisted sets made up of twisted sets. One little wire broken, ladder should be taken out of service later today. Two of those broken, ladder should be taken out of service immediately. The sliding sections, if they run out of lubrication on the sliding sections, it will start to use your paint as lubricant. you can repaint or buy a whole pallet of grease for the price of repainting one section once. So it's better to stay on top of greasing this ladder. Don't let it dry out. Now, I get asked a lot, often do we need to re-grease the ladder? I got a department in rural Minnesota that re-greases their ladder twice a year. They fly their ladder 3 times a year. They do it twice for training, once for inspection. Unless the silo's on fire, they don't fly it. So more or less, they don't need to grease it as often. I have a department in upstate New York that re-greases their ladder at least twice a month. They are connected to an airport. Airport uses sand on their runway, so the thing's constantly covered in grit. So they have to strip and re-grease it a lot more often. You guys probably aren't more than twice a month. You guys probably aren't twice a year. You're gonna have to find your happy medium. Just make sure it keeps that thing coat on there. Whenever I grease the ladder, I lubricate the waterway. That black anodized coating gets wiped down with ATF, just any automatic transmission fluid. We use that because the detergent's in there. Clean out that coating, as well as provides lubricant for the wiper seal. Then you also put the same lubricant we use on the sliding section, gets pumped into these gland seals. The electrical, make sure you don't see cuts in the copper or cuts in the insulation, exposed copper, anything like that. When extending or retracting the ladder, if you hear a high-pitched squealing, that's almost always that someone has missed one of the grease zerks on these cable turnarounds. There's pins on all those. Someone missed one of those, you'll get a high-pitched squeal. Extending or retracting, if it's not smooth, first thing I check, are my sections properly greased? Second thing I checked is my waterway properly greased? Last thing I'm going to check is cable tension. I don't expect you guys to hang weights. I'll have you guys do that. Take that ladder at 0 degrees, fully extend it, fully retract it, and there's going to be red marks on the back of the handrail, or on the handrails back by the turntable. Those should be within an inch of each other, but only check that when you extend it and retract it at 0 degrees. If you do it from a higher angle or a low angle, gravity will end up pushing them off. Elevating or lowering the ladder, if you hear a popping, it typically means the trunnions in the bottom of the elevation cylinders, where the pins go, those have not been properly greased. You'll get a popping sound to that. So once you get grease in there, then that goes away. Behind your driver's side stabilizer beam, back in here, there's going to be a hydraulic fluid level indicator. You need to extend the beam out a little bit to see that. Otherwise, we need everything else packed up on the truck before we check it. We're going to check it at about the same ambient temperature each time. So say we pick 70-degree fluid temp, 70 degrees plus or minus 15 degrees, you're fine. Just don't try to check it at 70 and not 140. It's going to look like 2 different levels. You have your hydraulic humidity filter up there. Operate at extreme cold. Keep in mind, as the temps drop, that fluid temp drops, that fluid temp gets thicker. Your ladder won't respond as fast as it normally would till that fluid gets up to temp. We're flowing water when we're done. If we're down, say, 20 degrees or less, we're going to take the ladder, put it up to 30 degrees, keep at least a garden hose worth of water flowing through the aerial, get that ladder fully retracted, go down underneath the truck, open your aerial drain, then turn the water off the truck. We're trying to prevent ice damming in the gland seals, as well as any flash freezing issues over the top of the aerial drain. If you do end up real iced up, like this truck is here, don't try to retract the ladder. You're going to end up damaging the electrical tracking, and you could possibly dent the sections. So what we do up by us, tip the ladder down off the side, cover it in tarps, pump truck exhaust or torpedo heaters in there to melt it off, then pack it up and go home. If you're watch your sliding sections, make sure they don't look like 60 grit sandpaper. If they do, strip it off, re-grease it. Keep any solvents away from your wire rope cables, so no brake clean, acetone, anything like that that'll strip that grease out of the inside of your wire rope cables. Maintenance, and said before, gotta say it again, anytime an override or manual control is used, all safety systems are overridden. You broke it, you bought it, it's your baby at that point. Okay, so starting out here, we have our control to flip up the cab here. Flip up the red cover, put it to raise, then your hold to activate. You need battery master and ignition on. Always remember, make sure everything's secure in the cab. Windshields aren't cheap, then there's the whole story of rolling truck downhill. So you're gonna have to throw wheel chocks anyways because you're flipping the ladder up, but keep that in mind. Now once the cab's up, throw your secondary lock. We want to make sure we have that extra security in case something were to fail up there. The cab won't fall. Then when you're done, if you flip down this, that'll flip this to the lower position. Then you'll press and hold activate, it'll lower itself down. Okay, so that pump operator step I talked about, there's a tab here and a tab here. You push in on those, then you're able to pull this out. This flips out. Ladders in the air, pump operator's got to be up here to isolate them in case we were to hit a power line. I get asked often enough what the weight limit is on here. There's someone who does my job that makes each and every one of you look tiny. So you guys all would be good. When you're done, flip this back up, push in on those tabs, put a little back behind it so you put it in, just because that's subject to all the dust and debris as we go down the road. We want to make sure it actually gets in the lock position. You will get a warning in the cab if it's not all the way in though. We have a stabilizer camera up there. Something I cover in every training because either your department has a story or you know of one that does. Dept goes in front of the rear axle, diesel goes behind the rear axle. Please don't put one in the other. If you make that mistake, don't turn on the truck at all. Or better yet, at least just don't turn on the engine. Fess up to the mistake right away, call the dealer, they come out here, pump the tanks, pump the filters, a little less harm, a little less foul. You started with one and the other, you're on a very, very short time clock before stuff starts getting destroyed. So if you do that, do not try to drive it to the dealer. Just call the dealer, they gotta send out a mechanic where the truck is at that point. I was told you guys have had these wheel chocks before. When you pull these out, good rule of thumb, grab here, pull it out, make sure you get past the lock there. If it's not past this lock, the truck can run them right over. Also, wash your fingers when you're moving these around.
You only make that mistake once.
You might know from experience. Your step back here, there's a crossbar. You pick up on the crossbar, and then you're able to drop it down. Once it's dropped down, if you look in here, there's going to be illumination lights in here. When aerial master's on, those will come on. This also has this little auxiliary step here. Looks a little comical with the ladder sitting, or with the truck sitting down on the axle, but there is a point where this comes in handy. Back in here, there's going to be a proximity sensor that detects whether the step is in the stowed position. That only works for the main step, doesn't count this. You have to remember to hook this up. Now, I see a lot of people do that. That is not in the stowed position. Driving down the road, gonna fall out. These steps are really good at taking weight this way. They're not good at taking telephone poles, mailboxes, stuff this way. There's someone who does, works 2 departments down from me. His job all day, every day is making these steps. He's got to make enough for the trucks we're putting out now, as well as the ones people rip off in the field. So please make sure when you put this up, pop it all the way in. Also, everybody puts know what's behind every door. Right here, there's a little door back in here. This is the brains of the operation. That's your computer, fuses, all that stuff. Do not spray pressure wash in there, please. You will make a nightmare.
Yeah, the big one, by one. With speaking bicycles. If they sign it,
Yeah, exactly.
You have a grade meter down here, slope meter on the back. You have your aerial inlet pressure, aerial drain. If you are feeding the aerial from the pump on the truck and you're not hitting your flow target, so you're going to bring a pumper in. You're going to shut the discharge down over there. When you shut the discharge down at the pump panel, that makes this to the tip of the ladder its own independent system. Then you're going to push the pumper in here, and you're only going to feed from the pumper. You're not going to try to open the discharge over here. We're not going to try to parallel feed it through the piping in here. It's not conducive to the flow. It ends up fighting, it's abusive on the flapper valve. We're only going to be pushing in, we're either going to pump the butt or we're going to pump the trunk, one or the other. Any questions with that? The stabilizer camera system. Again, that's going to show you an overhead video right here. And show you a red outline of where that's going to land. If you look at it with that stabilizer extended, it's going to look like it's way farther out than it actually is, and that's just due to the perception issue. These are fairly accurate. Where we run into accuracy issues with them is when people step on them, kick them, hit them with a hose, hit them with a pipe pole, something like that. If that ends up happening, talk to the dealer. They got to come out here and adjust the camera as well as some of the programming in order to line it back up again. All right, so battery switch first. Turn on the ignition. Gauges sweep in. Gauges sweep back. Lights on the dash clear. That's the point where you can start. So front wheel lock here. So that is on. Aero master on. Put down on the service brake. Push in the park brake. Front wheel lock automatically turns off. So does aerial master. Flip that up or hit aerial master. That turns on the setup preview. Set the park brake. Front wheel lock comes back on. Aerial master automatically comes back on. Fire side or fire screen is a pump focus screen. I click on the Pierce logo there. Now I can access my cameras. So down for backup. Blind side. Stabilizer camera. Hit any of these 5 buttons in order to get out of that. Underneath the menu button, I have an aerial screens. This is another way to access the screen we accessed before. Hitting the page button can cycle me through here. Same screens that I can see up on the ladder side. Down here. Home button takes me back to the truck screen. Camera menu is another way to access my cameras here.
His truck sounded like he was taking off.
Do not move truck. This will tell you the reasons not to move it. Currently we only have the driver's door open. Once those are all cleared, the truck will just spin in a circle. Under setup, blackout mode. This is for drivers that have issues with screen glare. You select enable and save. When you push in the park brake, the screen will turn off. Unless it has something to show you door open, blindside camera, backup camera, anything like that. It'll come back on to show you that. And then once it resolves that issue or the camera's disconnect or turned off, then it will turn the screen back off. The little tab on the side of the screen allows me to run, say, my emergency lights or front scene, driver side, passenger. You can activate these in case these switches were to have an issue. For regen, the first stage is it's going to throw the regen light. Second stage, it's going to start flashing the regen light. Third stage, it's going to flash the regen light, throw the check engine light. Fourth stage, it's going to flash the regen light, throw the check engine light, throw the stop engine light. Never want to let it get to the fourth stage. Fourth stage, you guys are calling the dealer. They got to come over with a laptop and force it into a regen. The first 3 stages, you guys can do stuff about it. Now, there's passive regen like we've always had on the trucks. Take it for a beat run down the highway. Once it hits its parameters, it'll start regenning on its own. It can passively regen even before it hits the point where it throws the regen light up on the dash. It kind of handles it once it sees its parameters. Also, you have parked regen. So that's going to be this DPF regen switch down here. It has to be at least calling for a regen. It has to have one of the lights up on the dash, one of the first 3 stages. If it has that, pull the truck outside, make sure your exhaust is clear of things you don't want to start on fire or melt. You're going to press and hold the DPF regen switch for about 2 to 3 seconds. Once it starts to regen at that point, comes up to about 1100 idle, it'll stay at that higher idle until it resolves its issue. once it gets done with its regen, it'll drop down to a base idle again. Now, if you get a call during that parked regen, perfectly fine. Push the park brake in, put it drive, either one of those, and that'll pull it out of a regen. Go run your call, perfectly fine. What I don't want you to do is use this regen inhibit switch. This regen inhibit switch, the only time we're using this is if we're worried about starting something on fire, melting something outside of our exhaust. The issue that happens is people click that switch and now that switch is active. So yes, it would pull me out of that parked regen, but now running to that call, it doesn't regen. On that call, it doesn't regen, even passively. The only ways to turn this off is to actually click the switch off or to cycle the ignition. That's how people got themselves real late stage, 4-stage regens and ended up hurting some emissions equipment. Now I get asked a lot, how long does a regen take? It's kind of like asking you guys how big a fire can get. There's quite a few other questions I gotta get answered first. It has to see assert all its parameters in order for the regen to start. I've had first light regens take me 5-10 minutes. I've had fourth light regens take me over 2.5 hours. So it depends on where it is in that regen scheme. Big misconception with these trucks is that they derate. This truck will not derate. It'll let you run real late stage, 4-stage regen, or calling for regen. But as you get into it, it gets to the point where the exhaust is so clogged. The exhaust gets so clogged that the truck's unable to breathe. You're going to start losing power just because the truck cannot exhale at that point.
Don't turn it all the way down.
Any questions as far as regen?
So the park regen, is that like a service regen, like a manual service regen?
So it's a way to get it to regen on command. It has to be calling for one. You can't preemptively do it.
Yeah,
But
you can't do a manual regen then.
It just means you have been running the truck to get it to do its own regen, right?
Yeah,
So you do it manually.
you can kind of get into that with city driving, or if you're doing a lot of med calls where it's
Short trips or a lot of idling.
Yeah.
So the recommendation from the manufacturers is to turn the trucks on. Don't idle a truck on a call. Whether or not your SOPs allow for you to do that is, we understand that. To some department, that SOP is not allowed.
So I've also seen that, if you're going to be parked and idling for a long time, you should just kick it into high idle.
No.
No?
So first of all, I got a white paper from the manufacturers telling me this was the new standard operating procedure because I grew up in a world where it was. You kicked it into high idle to avoid that.
Yeah.
With these trucks, they don't deal with the wet stacking issues the older diesel engines did. And yes, the engine technically burns cleaner at a high idle, but if you look at the total soot load, how much soot actually ends up in the exhaust is higher at a high idle. So they say do not manually high idle at all. The only time we're using high idle is for a air concern, electrical concern, obviously water flow concern. That's the only time we're high idling the engine. We're not high idling it because of an exhaust concern. And that's from Detroit, from Cummins, from Packard.
Cool.
So it just kind of let the engine do its own thing. It'll kind of bump its idle as it needs to. Not all the way to high idle, but it'll bump up to 1,000 if it's able to. Any other questions?
Yeah.
You guys want to meet on the back side of the truck? We're going to cover the EPU stuff. So back into this compartment. First things first, this controller is in here the wrong direction. What I'm going to recommend, anytime this controller goes in here, you should put it in like that. The nice part of this is this cord kind of holding this in here. Makes it harder for this to slide out. Seen some departments will put this side.
Stick right out.
When it's in like this,
It's back. It wants to push it out, yeah.
yeah, it doesn't. This is a.
Yeah, I'm sure there are only a couple $100.
Yeah, right, that's what we heard last time. That's the cost of the last ladder. This is the most important thing not to destroy.
Don't destroy it. Last time I checked, this was like the mid-mount one's $2,000. I think this one's a little bit cheaper, but not a lot cheaper.
That much?
I didn't know what you want.
So this is Water resistant, I dare say waterproof. I don't know how far underwater it can go before you have issues, but I feel like there's a problem with the rest of the truck if you find out how deep it'll go. You can stand a torrential downpour, run this controller just fine. You won't have issues. Not going to leak water in. But drop it again. Start cracking this case. Crack this case, you get water ingression, you get corrosion. Corrosion, controller stops working. Now, I don't see a lot of people running the aerial or running the stabilizers and drop this while they're running the stabilizer. Most common thing is I need to go quick talk something, do something, and you take the controller and set it here, or you take it and set it like that, and then someone else walks by, their radio catches it, and it slings off and bounces off the ground. So, if I need to go do something away from this, every single time I'm going to take that, it's safe. It's not going to get hurt in there. So I'll just put it back. So one of the things you're going to notice over your last truck, NFPA, increase the minimum volume requirements, the stabilizer alarms. Not listening to music, I'm just trying not to go deaf. I got to listen to these a lot. They are ironically over the minimum hearing protection threshold or OSHA. They're obnoxiously loud compared to the old ones. So,
We're good though, we're fine.
if I want to activate this EPU here, I'm going to run this beam out. So I'm going to hold out on this and then press down on this EPU activation switch.
Might be the most annoying sound ever.
Like I said, not quiet, they made it loud. So that's as easy it is to use this. Be the same thing with the controls up there. Now I talked about the alarm you'll get whenever this override is activated. That's that alarm. Whenever this door or the flip down door on top up there is open with the aerial in there, you'll get that same alarm. With the aerial in the cradle, there's an alarm or a visual alarm up there, just not an audio one. But it kind of gets you 2 reps on it, but a little quicker than everybody doing 2 setups. So first thing we need to do is get out the ground pads and the wheel shock. So rear stabilizers do not extend, they only go straight down. So rears. So in the cab, you need aerial master, aerial PTO, and the front wheel lock.
Can't be asking questions. You didn't sit in class yet. Oh, you were here yesterday. Try and ask one.
So coming around here, pull the control out, power it on. I have my illumination light, my activation light. Doesn't really matter what side I start on because I'm flatter here, but start by extending this side out. Thank you. Now I'm going to push and hold down. Stops on its own. Didn't release, still holding it. It's not going to move any farther. There's no rush to get your finger off of there. I'm going to come to this side, do the same thing. Again, no rush to get your finger off there. Then I'm going to grab levels. Good, hold it down. Full hold it down. There's no rush to get your finger off there. Yep, then apply the area.
Considered it soft.
This will be a soft set. If I wanted to transition to a hard set from here, I could run my rear stabilizers. Do something like that. Pick up that rear axle. But it's not necessary. It's just
hit auto right now with it.
no, because we're within a degree.
So now this is a hard set. We should have no limitation off the front, right?
I didn't have a limitation before either. I still have my front in contact. Hard set and soft set doesn't change your reach.
As long as you got axles on the.
As long as the tires are on the front, on the ground.
Yeah. Now that I lifted up, where I lost planto goes, now I have this light on. So now I have that limitation off the front.
Okay.
You hit auto set, will it go back?
No. Auto only cares it's within a degree of level. Doesn't care if it picks the front end up. Doesn't care if it picks the back end up. Doesn't care if all it has to do is put them straight down. Less reactionary torque. So you're using the rear axles as a counterweight when they're off the ground. If they're still on the ground, that is not counterweight available to you. So you have more reaction in the truck chassis as you get lower out there. Spikes, this is in contact with the ground now. I cannot drag that across the ground. So it prevents people from scratching up the top of the beams and dragging stuff across the ground. Now, where I talked about how much this truck can lift itself up in the air. That's cool. This truck has the ability to completely lift itself up in the air, but obviously, as you guys saw, once I got it up there, it slides on those slide pads a little bit. We need to pay attention to that. That's why a setup like this is not preferable. While it feels very stable, it does not give us anywhere near enough slide protection. Yeah, just I overextended one side got extended far up, and the other side just couldn't. That was everything bottomed out.
Oh no, that one's not even down at all. It's all the way up.
I didn't bring it down.
Right?
These rear ones are just like the side where I bring it down and it stops itself. That's the reason it must have touched off and stopped. So if I was in a situation where I lifted it too high, I would just sit there and drop the chassis down a little bit, get at least one of my axles in contact with the ground.
She slid a good 5 inches forward. You can see on the camera.
So that's why I want to keep that axle in contact.
If you hit auto stabilize right now, will it go up?
It'll pick that front end up. Auto level will only add more penetration, it'll never pick up. Okay, if we were in a situation where I was worried about sliding, where icing, snows, conditions like that, I want to leave as much rubber down on the ground. If we were on an uphill like this, what I could do Now I'm in a very soft setup, but I got a ton of rubber on the ground. That's really going to prevent me from sliding. Between that and the wheel chuck, I have a higher chance of not having any slide issues at that point. Also, if I was going pointed downhill, if I hit level assist right now, it's going to pick my back end up to match the front end. If it was going downhill, it picked that front end to match the back end. Well, because I have that limit off the front, I'm going to prefer to run a setup like this, where I'm not picking that front end up, especially if I need my objectives that way on the truck. I want to keep that front end down on the ground so I don't end up with that front axle limit.
Right now, you're good. You're 100% on everything, right? Yeah, you're in the green. You're good. So that's great. But look how much you're a pretty good angle. Still good angle, but it's good enough.
And keep in mind, up to 5.5 degrees going uphill. That's a lot.
Pretty good hill, yeah.
That's a pretty good hill. We're going to pretend that the truck is tipped this way. So this is the high side of the truck, that's the low side. I only really start implementing this once I get to, say, 3 degrees of slope is when I start implementing this procedure. So I'll take my high side beam and I'll put it out, but I won't bring it down. I'll just leave it up in the air. Then I'll come to my low side, bring that beam out, and bring that beam down. Now that it's down on the ground, I'll release on here and then re-engage. And I'll be running here to get myself to where I'm level. Pretend I got to level at that point, then I will bring my high side down. And then I'll grab level assist. Level assist is always going to bring the low side up to the high side. So what I've effectively done at that point is put less jack down on the high side than I necessarily would have, which will help me reduce the overall height of my setup at that point. Okay, so I'm holding level assist and it stopped there. If I look at my jack here on the low side, it has lifted this side jack to the point where it is no longer in contact. All I have to do is correct that, hold down, hit it recontact. So this is where, like, if you didn't do that setup procedure on a 3-degree hill, you're going to end up with a taller set like this.
So it won't level assist past wherever it is if there's one that's not contacted.
Nothing, yeah.
One of the front.
One of the front, okay.
These can be in the air, that doesn't matter. One of the front, those are kind of your anchor point. Those are required to be in
All
contact.
4 green lights need to be on for it to level assist.
No,
No?
just these two.
Only the top. Sorry.
Just your front two.
Got it, got it.
Think of those as that's the prerequisite. It needs to see
Okay.
those on the ground. Does not care how far your beams are extended. Only cares that those two are down.
Got it.
Okay, so the red marks on top of the base section on that side, those are the section alignment I talked about. If you fully extend the ladder, fully retract it at 0 degrees, those should be within 1 inch of each other. The black marks on this section align with the black marks on the base section. The numbers on the inside and outside only apply when you have it vertical for your vertical height. You have a manual angle indicator here, FRC intercom here. The intercom up there is off. Once you leave the cradle, then that will start communicating down this way. In order to talk that way, push to talk and talk at the box. You have a load chart here, third-party inspection sticker, wallpaper of things not to do with the aerial. You have an emergency stop here, push down to activate, turn clockwise to deactivate. Trip and tracking lights, 1 click up they're on, 1 click up they're off, and then your run lighting here to turn the run lighting on the ladder on. Stow deployed switch as well as the stowed light, monitor controls, ladder controls. Or pick up the ladder, we got to pick up on this bottom collar. I don't know how much of a prayer you have of actually seeing this screen with that. I can attempt it. See the yellow stabilizer? Can you see the different colors on the stabilizers?
Yes.
Okay, so the stabilizer on the officer side is yellow, so that means it's short jack. So now when we try to rotate into that short jack, it locks it out and doesn't allow you to rotate past there. So that's because it's short jack. Trying to run the ladder into the truck. I just keep holding down, it's gonna come down, pulls up to the truck to get the stop. So it cuts me out there. Okay, so we talked about the ramps in class, but if I take this joystick, run it wide open, then just let go, there's that little bit of over travel there. But instead, if I ramp it down like you would on an older style ladder, it stops pretty much right where I let it go. So it's learning how to ramp them. Part of that is if I take one of these rotation controls and I slowly start to advance it, the moment that high idle comes up, I'm going to hold it in that exact position. That high idle comes up the moment the valve starts to open. So that's a good way to find the bottom of the valve. So this really helps if you want to really slowly rotate into something. Also, when I rotated or I'm like ramping off the control myself, I ramped off to this point. So one of the maximum functions blowdowns, as I come full speed in, I didn't let go at all. It slows itself down. Now that I'm fully retracted, this is that very fast rotation. It's that 45 second. Now if I extend out, it drops down to 100. If I retract back in, picks right back up.
Not directly set up to go back into the cradle, will it automatically do that? Will it set itself, correct itself to go back into the cradle?
So you need to be within 6 degrees left and right. You need to be fully retracted. And you need to have the monitor in the stowed position. So I'm trying to be like really bad at it today, intentionally. All you need to do, as long as you're within that window, is hold both. So it won't automatically retract you, it won't automatically stop the monitor. You have to attempt it. As long as you're within this window here, so even if I would have kept holding down, collision avoidance would have stopped you. Don't try at 7 degrees. Now, set down pressure. Go. If you're shorter, going up through the bottom here is easier. If you're taller, coming around this side is a little bit easier. More or less if you have a longer arm. So, I'm going to pop that off, through that D10. flip over to the fire defensive hook and hook it in there.
I didn't see shit. Hold on. We don't have a sticker. Are we supposed to have a sticker that says what it's supposed to do? Right? You want the real good view, you gotta go up and on down. I'll do that. I didn't quite see it.
Okay, so right now I have it in the fire position, so I am able to move the monitor. Now, if I flip this back to the rescue position,
You can come under here, right?
automatically drops it down. You're not allowed to go above the waterway center line when you're in a rescue position, just so you're not poking your stack tips up to the other side. Easiest place to do the fire to rescue to fire is from inside of here.
Laying in there.
Best place to video it.
What do you have to do?
I can see.
No, I know that.
So we could still use it like this though.
You can still pour water in rescue.
All the way.
This
Second stage.
Oh.
Yeah, we're gonna keep it back on the
All at the same time?
We want the
Now you gotta put some string piece here. You gotta get it.
You don't have to worry about it.
That not metal, and I'll go through and I'll just wipe that down. And if I have stuff that's like kind of this is going to be kind of stubborn, WD-40 and a red shop rig, and WD-40 liquefies the super lube so it wipes right off.
John's.
And that is not designed to support the weight of it. That's designed to
Just keep it on track.
well, when we retract this in, this right here needs to land on this, and it's just to make sure it doesn't.
And that
bite.
holds it up. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Is it on one right now?
It's hooked.
It's in rescue.
It's hooked to the rescue.
Oh, okay.
So you have to retract it all the way, flip the switch, and then you can go back out.
Yep.
You gotta put the ladder up. I don't feel ready. Hey, where do you want to flow it to? Maybe the parking lot? You don't want to go into the house. Go right into the parking lot. Right at the light bulb. Hey, right over. Right at the light bulb. You want to put it in RPM if you're on left? I'm bringing it. Yeah, you're good now. The bump was good. Don't retract. That doesn't go. It goes from left to right on the building. Danny might be doing it. Oh, Steve's doing it. No, it's cool. The controller, you can set it to just keep sweeping. That's what it's do. Nice. With the TPM. You know what I don't like is that the pump operator